is a cylinder. It's actually not, it's the closest thing to a cylinder that I had on hand at the shop. Now when you make this puzzle, I like to hold it between my finger and my thumb and just spin it like that on the belt sander. Normally I hold it at about 45 degrees to the travel of the belt so you can let the abrasive do its thing. Now when you do this on 2 axes, you end up with this wonderful steinmetz solid puzzle here. When you do it on 3 axes, you end up with a 3-axis steinmetz solid, and the more axes you do it on, the closer you get to a sphere. Now there's only so many axes that you can regularly do that on a cube, but a dodecahedron has 6. So if I was to hold the puzzle between my thumb and my finger and spin it like that on all of the 6 different axes, I would end up with a very interesting steinmetz solid, which is exactly what I tried to do and screwed it up, and then I ended up with most of a sphere, which I ended up putting in this puzzle. But today I'm going to make a sphere intentionally, because I think that it's actually not that hard if that's what you're trying to do. So without further ado, let's get started. Now it's a little counterintuitive, but the most important part of building a sphere is actually in the extensions, not all of the cutting down and the filling of the pieces. You see, if I was to take this and just turn it into a sphere now, I would break through on a lot of the centers around the edges. So what you want to do is put about 3 millimeters of epoxy sculpt onto each of the center caps before you start making the shape.
I tightened everything up as I usually do, and I took it over to my bandsaw, but I realized pretty quick that I didn't have to tilt the table at all.
That actually works pretty well. I always forget that sometimes you don't actually have to tilt the bandsaw. I guess because I do it so much, I like my bandsaws like I like my coffee. 45 degrees. You gotta commit to the bit.
I was going to be cutting down on these edges here one by one, about halfway through the layer. Although it's important to mention that I was actually going to be holding the puzzle the other way, I was just cutting this way so you could get a good angle.
Now as I'm making all of these cuts, I'm periodically stopping and gluing all of the caps on the inside of the pieces in place. It's probably a good idea to actually glue all of these in before you even start the modification, but I am lazy. The point is, every 3 or 4 cuts or so, I like to stop, get some super glue out, and just dab a little bit of super glue on the inside of all the caps that I've exposed so that they don't fly out as I'm making any more cuts. Remember, when you get to a point where you've got 3 intersecting cuts, there's not a whole lot of plastic holding that little cap there in place.
Most of the remaining cuts went the way you would expect, and as I worked my way around the puzzle, it started to resemble a sphere. The one issue I had to deal with was some of the offcuts falling down into the gap where the blade went into the table.
Every goddamn time. I'm gonna have to do something to fix that.
This wasn't a really big deal, but it was a bad omen for things to come.
Oh boy. That doesn't look right.
After some inspection, it turned out that the blade tensioner had loosened itself over time. This probably led to some kind of oscillation that eventually broke the blade. Whatever the cause, I needed a new blade now.
I would like to thank my supporters on Patreon for buying me spare blades before I needed them.
The remaining cuts went about as smoothly as I could have hoped.
And there you have it. It almost looks like a sphere already. Time for the disassembly. Alright, so we have everything disassembled now, and along with that, here are all of the centers that we prepared earlier. So now what I'm going to do is take a blade and go through all of these pieces and just cut off all the little bits of melted plastic that would have been kicked up by the bandsaw.
After you finish cutting the puzzle, you're usually going to end up with a lot of pieces looking like this. You want to cut off all of that melted plastic so that they end up looking like this. It's only after you've done all of this that you can easily stuff all the pieces full of epoxy sculpt and continue the build.
Alright, so now everything has been prepared, and we can start filling everything. I've separated all these pieces from the ones that I'm not going to have to do anything to from now on, and so all of these pieces are ready to be filled with epoxy sculpt.
I got out my favorite filler material of choice, and I began mixing up small batches to fill some of the pieces.
Do you want to see how I mix epoxy sculpt? I'll show you. So I like to roll the two halves together in between my palms into a little ball like that, and then I like to roll it into a kind of sausage like that, and then I like to just fold it over and then repeat the process. And it's a really quick way of mixing up epoxy sculpt. If you think it's all mixed up, mix it some more, because it's really not.
There's probably a bit of a debate as to whether or not you actually need to disassemble the puzzle to fill all of these pieces, seeing as how they're all readily accessible while the puzzle is assembled, but I'll leave that up to you. I have a method and I prefer to stick to it. But after everything was assembled, the puzzle was already starting to roll like a sphere.
We're getting there. All right. Yeah, baby. That looks terrible, as they usually do before they look fantastic. So now what I'm going to do is take it over to my belt sander and begin the magical part of this whole build. Now, whenever I make a cylinder, I like to hold the puzzle between my fingers, like I said at the start of this video, and spin it up on the belt sander. The difference here is I'm going to be rolling the puzzle back and forth to slowly get that cylindrical shape, and this is amplified by the fact that I can actually change where my fingers are holding the puzzle throughout the shaping process. So between changing which centers I like to hold between my fingers, I'm also going to be mixing up all the pieces and making sure I'm cycling them all through. That way I can ensure that it's going to be completely uniform and completely spherical. But before I do that, I'm going to have to take two centers off without breaking them, because it's already tightened up. 1, 2. There we go. So let's get started.
I started off by letting the puzzle spin freely. This was just to knock off the highest points and to get everything spinning without it bouncing so much. After I did that, I swapped a couple of the centers around and I did it on a few more axes before I really got into the shaping. I loosened everything up and I scrambled it all, and then I re-tightened everything and I started turning it some more. And as I turned it now, I started holding it at about 45 degrees of the travel of the belt, and I just started rocking it back and forth, slowly getting it into that spherical shape. Remember, this is not about aggressive sanding, it's about very incremental sanding and swapping all the pieces around and doing it again and again and again. You're not going to get this shape quickly, you're gonna get it slowly.
We're getting somewhere.
That'll do. Oh, the distortion on this lens, I love it. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going through and giving the puzzle a final sanding, and I'm using my finger just to feel any high or low spots, and I'm trying to knock off all of the high spots to blend everything in. And the final piece of the pun intended puzzle is to use a sanding block like this and just kind of twist everything almost like you're juicing an orange. And as you can see, it's now looking pretty damn good, although we do have a couple centers here that are going to need some repairing, but that's not too difficult. So now what we're going to do is take everything apart and start rounding over all the pieces. It's funny because it's round. I could totally make something just out of this. So I'm using a nail file to knock off all the sharp edges of all of the pieces, as regular viewers of the channel will be well familiar with. And after I've done that, I like to use a sanding block just to go around and kind of just smooth over all of those edges, as well as all of the faces of the pieces.
As I rounded over all the pieces, I slowly reassembled the puzzle, and the remainder of the project consisted of painting and cutting the stickers, so I did the rest of that off camera.
And here it is, the puzzle is finally done. This has turned into one of those, it'll be done tomorrow for the last week
projects, and I am so glad that I finally managed to cut all the stickers for it, because somehow these stickers managed to take 2 days, and even then I'm still not satisfied with them. I probably won't actually end up selling this puzzle because I don't think it's of the quality where I can actually comfortably sell it and sleep well at night knowing that somebody paid money for it, so it's probably going to remain in my collection. But that means you get to build one for yourself if you want to, which you probably don't, because most people just watch these videos as background noise. But if you do actually end up trying to make one of these, I think the technique that I've demonstrated is pretty approachable for anybody to try. I'm actually really happy with the color scheme. It's been a long time since I just did a standard old color scheme, and I do love the 12 color scheme of the standard Megaminx. I think it's a very nice sticker scheme, especially with your opposite colors that are very similar to one another. This has been one of my highest recommended puzzles for a long time. Even in the before times, people were asking me to make a spherical Megaminx. People just love spherical puzzles. I really don't like them, partly because they're kind of hard to make, and also they don't really add anything to the solve. There is no shape-shifting, there is no bandaging, there is no... It's a Megaminx. And it does kind of roll around, which means you can't actually put it on a shelf without the fear of it just rolling off. Which means you have to put it behind something else, which makes it really hard to display unless you have like something to rest it on. I was gonna do something like my own little spin on it, and I was gonna extend 3 corners and make like 3 legs so that it would say, ooh, I might do that later. Actually, wait. That's what this is for, they just put more pieces on it. But anyways, I hope you guys like this puzzle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Something is inside this. Oh, I can make maracas. I feel like that's appropriation.